So, we found out what the deal with the mirror is. And that kind of taught us a lot about what the deal with Titan shifters is. And Hannes is officially part of the club now. So let's get to it. The first thing I want to talk about is the kid fight in episode 8, because I enjoyed that kid fight way more than I probably should have. I found a lot of amusement in the fight, and it was funny to watch like the drunken Hannes interacting with everybody the way that he did. Also, when you look at the fight, it really shows us a lot about Aaron's character, and that some of his traits are pervasive, meaning they've been there all along and they're sort of part of who he is. Aaron's temper and naivete to the consequences of his actions, well, they seem to be core to his personality. Like they are what makes Aaron Aaron from a very early age, and it's still present in present day. And other than a significant physiologic change, I mean, becoming a Titan is definitely different than what he used to be. But other than that, his character hasn't really had an arc yet. Now, the stories built around him have had arcs, but his real character arc hasn't really started yet. But I have a feeling it's coming, and watching this kid fight really makes me think, you know what? We haven't got what's best or what's most exciting to come with Aaron yet. And I think it might be coming soon. We also see a core of Mikasa's character when we see that kid fight, because we see her compulsion to protect Aaron. And she also seems to be unconcerned about consequences in her own way. I mean, at the end of the kid fight, Mikasa was the one in the military police's custody while Aaron ran away. And I feel like Mikasa is still in present day willing to sacrifice herself for Aaron's benefit, and he doesn't really seem to appreciate it. Now, Mikasa has had a lot of character development because season 1 it explored her backstory and that tragedy she suffered at an early age, and it did a great job of explaining how Mikasa developed into the character she is now. And I feel like Armin has had an arc since this kid fight. I mean, he's become this excellent strategist, and he's also proving his intellect can solve intriguing puzzles, and there's a whole side of him that he didn't have back in Shiganshina. And of course, Hannes has had a very distinct character arc. I mean, going from this drunken, lazy soldier that we see in the garrison to sort of a traumatized hero who's trying to do right. And it's actually a very inspirational arc, at least to me. But Mikasa and Aaron, they haven't really taken off on their own arcs yet. And once they do, I have to say I can only see it going one way. Whatever their changes are, and I feel certain there will be changes, it just really seems to be setting up this inevitable heartbreak. Because what I think we're going to see ultimately is when Mikasa must stop protecting Aaron from the world and instead choose to protect the world from Aaron. It almost makes me cry just kind of thinking about it, but that just seems like the narrative course this story's hinting at. And I've been wrong plenty of times about stories, but that's just what my mind is fixed on. Kind of like what I would do if I was the one telling this story. But my heart is bracing itself because it knows it's really gonna hurt if this happens. I wouldn't expect this anytime soon, though. This is kind of like the sort of major event that I think would happen in the last batch of episodes. Probably even like those episodes that haven't been released yet. We'll just have to see. But I watched that kid fight, and I went back and watched my reaction. And all I could think was, like, this story is making me laugh now just to set me up to cry later. Like, that kid fight really seemed to bring it into laser focus just how much could change between those two. Like I said, though, I guess I'll have to wait and see. And we do, back on the wall in present day, get Hannes joining the team. You know, so to speak, he's joining up with Armin and Mikasa with the goal of rescuing Aaron. And I love it. I love seeing Hannes there. I love how this shows his feeling of responsibility for these kids, particularly Aaron. And I suspect he feels that way in large part because he failed to save Aaron's mom, and he kind of felt like a coward after that, even though I've said at least a couple of times he absolutely did the right thing. But when it comes to kind of the central three in this story, Armin, Mikasa, and Aaron, they don't seem to have any kind of parental figures other than their military commanders. So I think it's really nice seeing Hannes kind of step in and try to keep them together. And I really admire how he's trying to give them comfort by talking about Aaron's tenacity. And also I think he's absolutely correct talking about Aaron's tenacity. And I also appreciate that this isn't necessarily an easy thing for Hannes, because we saw how he had a moment up on the wall when he was triggered by the appearance of the colossal titan and kind of, thought back to that unfortunate day in Shiganshina. And this moment lets me know Hannes is overcoming some of his own demons by charging after the person that he knows is this Titan that triggers him, and his instincts are probably telling him to run the other way. And it's also kind of noble because this isn't about Hannes' own rage or hatred or glory or thirst for vengeance, but rather it's something like a true paternalistic instinct, and that's something I can relate to and absolutely admire. It's amazing just how far some of these characters have come. With Hanji, we see her too injured to go back to Connie's hometown. So what we see is Moblit go back kind of at her command or on her behalf. And while Moblit's looking at the disabled Titan, he finds a picture of Connie's parents, and I think that picture, particularly when he holds it upside down so you see the faces side by side, that pretty much erases any doubt as to whether or not that's actually Connie's mom, right? And her eyes, the mom Titan's eyes, they're moving, and she's trying to move her withered up limbs, and she's just trapped there. She can't move. She kind of looks pitiful, really. And I pity her because I know she's Connie's mom. And a lot of guys, we love our moms, even if they're not perfect, and I'm just kind of hurting for Connie watching her there. And while she's kind of writhing, I'm having this thought. I'm wondering, why doesn't she just return to human form and then she could get out of this situation? Why is she remaining trapped there? But because this show anticipates every question, we will get an answer to that in the next episode or two. And as these 3 episodes go on, we see more of Reiner's breakdown. It gets demonstrated more and more plainly that Reiner has a split in his consciousness, like his consciousness is split into at least 2 parts, distinctly into soldier and warrior. And I think we may even see the moment when he crosses that point of no return, though. I can't be certain that that's exactly when it started, but we do see a moment that seems to absolutely cement that segmentation of his psyche. We see a flashback to the Titan attack on Trost, which we now know he had a hand in. And we see him watching Marco die. And suddenly, he's unaware of his own role in Marco's death. He asks, why is Marco being eaten? And I think this might have been the moment that the cognitive dissonance in Reiner's mind became so great that he had to adopt this extreme coping mechanism. And this might be the moment when he completely segmented the 2 parts of his personality. And also, this mental separation between soldier and warrior, well, it really explains how he appeared so sincere at earlier parts of the story, and how he fooled so many people so completely, and in a way, he was kind of fooling himself, right? And, this is probably a good time to talk about some examples of psychopathology in Attack on Titan this season. And they're not perfect examples. They're not textbook accurate, but they are worth discussing from a narrative perspective. And I'm no expert, but I did get an A in psychopathology many, many years ago. The most relevant person to start with is really Reiner, right? And his dissociative identity disorder. And that's a condition that lay people sometimes call a split personality or multiple personalities, but the textbook name for it is dissociative identity disorder. And the DSM, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And I used to own a copy of that. Don't ask me why. I had the DSM-4. I think they're up to 5 or 5R or 6 now. But it says that dissociative identity disorder is associated with overwhelming traumas. And I think, that feeding your friend to a monster, well, that would probably count as the kind of overwhelming trauma that could trigger that. And then also, when you look at the story, there's this whole Jekyll and Hyde nature of Titan shifters in the first place, and as a whole, that kind of works as a metaphor for dissociative identity disorder in its own right, doesn't it? And then we've got Eren. Eren with his anger management issues. You gotta put that first and foremost in his personality. And his inability to weigh the consequences of lashing out, all of that seems pathologic to me. And going back to the DSM-4, going back to some reference materials, problems dealing with angry feelings may be linked to psychological disorders such as anxiety or depression, and I can certainly see that with Eren. But this theory I've kind of had for a couple of episodes now is that Eren possibly exhibits some traits consistent with borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality disorder can be characterized by a long-term pattern of unstable interpersonal relationships. I think Eren seems a little unstable in his relationships. A distorted sense of self, like rushing in against 3 guys bigger than you and thinking you can win that fight. And also strong emotional reactions, which we've seen from Eren. And another characteristic of borderline personality disorder that I feel like I've seen with Aaron is a phenomenon called splitting. And this is where an individual sees a person as either all good or all bad, and they can't grasp the concept that everybody is really a little bit of both depending on the circumstance. And I see this with like how Aaron couldn't transform to fight Annie because Annie was all good until she was all bad. And I also see his extreme swings with Reiner. Though I do have to say, when it comes to Reiner, it's probably justified because he really is kind of broken into an all good and an all bad. So maybe that's not fair to Aaron when I put that out there as an example. But of course, difficulty controlling anger is a characteristic of the condition borderline personality disorder. And then we've got Hannes with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is only touched on mildly, but I think we get a whiff of it with what we see from him. And as I've said before, I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't want to trivialize what any real-world people are going through by taking it too lightly. So I'm just going to say maybe you can see that there with Hannes. And then we've got Pixis with his addiction or his alcoholism, because he's sitting up on top of that wall and he's chugging liquor. And I don't think he's just drinking for fun. I think it's a coping mechanism. And as much as we've seen him do it, he'd probably go through some kind of withdrawals if he stopped suddenly. So I think, you got a good point there. Maybe he's an example of addiction, alcoholism. Then we come to Mikasa. And I think Mikasa, we have to talk about codependency. And codependency, it's really a trait and not so much a pathology all its own, but boy, does she exhibit some of those signs. Because the condition being codependent, well, that describes someone in an imbalanced relationship. The main characteristic is when one person enables another person's self-destructive tendencies. And I think you could absolutely interpret Mikasa's relationship with Eren that way. And then maybe Bertolt as well. Maybe there's some codependency there with Reiner. I don't feel like I've seen just enough of Bertolt to make that conclusion yet. And also maybe Bertolt's just overwhelmed by everything. Or burnhole, as I like to call him sometimes. Others? Yeah, I'm sure there's other examples, but they just haven't caught my attention. So let me know if you can think of any. You can just put something down in the comments. And now I've also got to say, if not for recent developments with the character, I would have a ton of speculation about Hanji as a psychopath or a sociopath or someone with antisocial personality disorder. But now I see her in a very different light. I see her as much more heroic than I did before, and I'm not nearly as scared of her as I used to be. So I'm going to give her a pass. But one thing Reiner and Amir, what they seem to agree on, is that Krista is important. And it's killing me because I just can't quite put together a well-formed theory on exactly what Krista knows. But whatever it is, it seems to be just as important to the Titan shifters as it does to humanity. And other than her devotion to Krista, I fully expect Amir's loyalties to be fluid. But it left me hanging so badly when her interest alignment went from Eren to Reiner. Because she was about to tell me who the true enemy of humanity is. Amir nearly reveals it, then she kind of changes who she's going to side with, and then she plays dumb. And she leaves me hanging. But I absolutely loved Amir's flashback, and her story told us so much, not just about Amir, but about this world, and more specifically about Titan shifters. But it turns out Amir wasn't born into any special kind of role. She was just like an orphan or this urchin, this child who was a marginalized member of society that nobody really cared about or missed. And she was basically abducted by this cult, seemingly at random. I mean, we might find out that there's more to it and it wasn't as random as it appeared in a future episode, but as given to us here, it looks random. And she's set up as like this figurehead for this cult or this church, if you want to call it that. And it really seemed to me like she was just used to manipulate these cult members by the leaders of the cult. Honestly, they just needed somebody and they grabbed her. Maybe they thought she looked cute or innocent or she was the youngest one they could find and they could kind of brainwash her into this. But she was just used to manipulate these members of the cult by these people that I'm assuming were the actual leaders of the cult. And manipulation seems to be this major recurring theme of Attack on Titan and more specifically my Attack on Titan reviews. But she really doesn't have the blood of the king. She was just kind of set up to take the fall when the authorities come knocking. At least that's my interpretation of events. And the show does make sure that we really understand that Amir's hometown was outside the walls. So it's making it clear that there, at least at one point in time, was civilization and a society of some sort beyond the walls. And, I speculated about that and the way the Titan shifters want to get back to their hometown. I think maybe there still is some measure of civilization beyond the walls that, for whatever reason, the powers that be don't want the common folk behind the walls to know exists. But Amir's role with the cult. I think what we see here with Amir, particularly the way she's set up to take the fall and to be like the sacrificial lamb when the authorities clamp down on the cult, well, I think this absolutely explains Amir's feeling of kinship with Krista. And these cult leaders, I couldn't help but notice that they even kind of dress like the Wallists do in present day. And I can't help but wonder if this is not just a coincidence that Amir's cult and the Wallists look so much alike. I think it's entirely possible that the latter may have directly evolved from the former, and that this is very intentional and that these are both manufactured movements, if you will. And then I also have to start wondering like the second level of thought, like exactly how similar are Krista and Amir? Like how much are they really alike? Like, is it possible that Krista isn't really Historia Rice? Like, is she just another orphan who was abducted and set up as a false heir? Like, is the claim that she has the blood of nobility just as false as the claims that Amir was blood of the king? Like, now I'm really getting my conspiracy theory gears grinding in my head. But back with Amir's story, we see her stoned, we see her taken to what looks like a wall to me, and she's thrown off the wall and she becomes a Titan. And after watching Amir's story, I think I grasp all but maybe one element of what I'll call the Titan cycle, the way Titan shifters are made in this world. And watching Amir get thrown off the wall, I wasn't quite sure what happened there. I didn't know if Amir was a race that already had like this innate Titan shifting ability and that being pushed off the wall forced her to transform. And it also seemed, at least to me, like the guy who threw her off the wall, like he might have stabbed her or something first. Like you kind of hear a noise and a grunt and it sounds like a stab, but I couldn't really see what happened. And I rewatched that scene with Amir being stabbed and tossed over and over and over again. And the image on the screen never offered me a good view of what happened. So I did something I don't usually do. I loaded the episode into my editing software and I went frame by frame, zoomed in about 150%. And then I saw it. And you don't see it when she's stabbed. You see it when she's being chucked off the wall. And Amir catches your attention in that scene, so you're not really looking at the guard's other hand. It's like sleight of hand, a little magic trick. But when I slowed it down, paused it, took my time and looked over the frame, you can see what I'm pretty sure is a syringe in the guard's hand. So that's awesome. I know what happened now. Here's what I think happened. You stab them with this serum that turns them into a Titan. What I don't quite know yet is exactly what's in the serum. You stab them with the serum, then they have the ability to become a Titan. Then you have to essentially put them in a mortal situation. You either have to kill them or put them in a situation where the only way to avoid death is becoming a Titan. So now I know how they get turned into Titans. We're going to explore more about how they go back to human. And I do also want to just stop and say that like punishing people by turning them into giant creatures who live only to eat people, well, that sounds like a terrible idea to me. I don't think that's what you want to do to punish people because you're building your own apocalypse that way. Unless maybe it's being done to appease some other Titan group. Like maybe there's a group of Titans out there and maybe this is some kind of a promise that allows humans and Titans to peacefully coexist. You know, periodically you'd sacrifice some humans to make more Titans since, you know, we've learned that Titans don't reproduce the old-fashioned way. I don't know, just a thought. So Amir is a Titan, and we see her spend at least 60 years as a Titan. We see her being pretty peaceful. She even just lays down in like this divot in the ground, and she lays still so long that soil gathers over top of her, and she seems to be buried underneath the dirt. And I thought, wow, now that's an idea. Like maybe there's a lot more Titans lying just below the ground surface, waiting to like burst forward when they're least expected. And then I thought maybe that's where some of the Beast Titans that he commanded, where they came from. Like he just stomped his feet and he woke up a bunch of dirt Titans. But we do learn something else here, because once the serum turns a human into a Titan, they don't actually become a full-fledged Titan shifter until they eat a person, and that turns them back into a human, and then they seem to have that ability. And I think that's such a clever twist. I wasn't really expecting that to be part of this mythos at all, and I love it. And I thought that's probably why Connie's mom can't go back to her human form. She's stuck in this disabled Titan form until she eats a human. So she's trapped there unless, somebody gets close enough she can nibble them up. And I look at Amir in her Titan form and then in what I'll call her shifter Titan form. And the most obvious difference between those two forms is the change in her teeth. I think you couldn't help but see that change in her teeth. And as an initial Titan, well, her teeth are more blunt and they're straight. And honestly, they look kind of like the teeth on horses or cattle. They look more like the teeth of a plant eater or a vegetarian or a herbivore. But after tasting the flesh of a human, that's when she gets those predator teeth, or shark teeth like I like to call them. And it's this great sort of symbolism of her going from a more innocent Titan to one who understands what she's doing. And I wonder if this sort of physical change happens with all the shifters after they eat a human, or if this is something unique to Amir's character. I don't know the answer to that yet. But one thing I'm certain of is that Aaron is not going to take it well at all when he discovers he's eaten a human. I'm tempted to go back to season 1 and frame by frame a few scenes and see if I can tell who it was when Aaron ate that first human. But I also kind of just want to wait for whatever organic reveal the show gives me because they've been so extraordinarily satisfying up until this point. So I think I just want to go with the flow. But I do wonder what happened to that second person that the Colossal Titan swallowed, we haven't seen from him again. I think it's been implied in the comments, and it makes sense to me that was simply to get ODM gear because Bertolt does have ODM gear when we see him back in human form. Also, Reiner and Bertolt, they refer to Aaron as a coordinate or the coordinate. I don't know what this means. I mean, I know a coordinate is usually a set of numbers that demark a point on a map, but I don't think that's what they're talking about. But boy, now I'm wondering, what is special about Aaron now? And then I also wonder, does this kind of concern Grisha's rediscovery of the Titan serum? Did Grisha rediscover it, or has it always been there the whole time? I don't know. And then I start to wonder, maybe Grisha is at the Titan hometown because he took off in his chuck wagon and we haven't seen or heard from him since. And then I start to wonder, being the coordinate. If Aaron is the coordinate, does that mean using samples of Aaron's blood can allow more people to be turned into Titans? When they make that Titan serum, is that injecting a little bit of a certain type of Titan into humans to turn them into these Titan shifters? Just some thoughts I'm having. Or is it just Grisha's basement and the fact that Aaron has that key to Grisha's basement? Is that what they mean by the coordinate? Just some thoughts. I don't know, but I'm eager to watch some more episodes and find out. And remember, I'm proud of you for watching anime, and I'll talk to you soon. You stab them with this serum that turns them into a Titan. You stab them with this serum that turns them into a Titan.